on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line with the man himself, Tom Pelissero, back here on the show. How are you, Tom?
Well, first of all, Rich, before we get to Roquan, I have to say your candy opinions might be the most ridiculous opinions you've ever stated on this show. I thought Twizzlers over Red Vines was bad enough, but jelly beans, #1 candy. All the candy in the world, you're going to the stuff you stick in a plastic egg on Easter.
Well, first of all, Tom, not to get too deep here, I'm Jewish, so I've never really had what you were referring to, you know. So I guess Easter is my sweet tooth every day. But oh my gosh, I don't know what to say, Tom.
Wow.
I really am interested in your information, but I might have to hang up right now. I don't know what to say.
You're Jewish, which means your parents probably picked up the leftover jelly beans and the marshmallow peeps and all that stuff in like June when they're on the clearance shelves. They're like, hey,
yeah. Yes.
holiday.
Well, my parents are always looking for clearance sale. They always did. But okay. Right. Well, let's place that aside then. You and I will just have to agree to disagree on that. What is happening with Roquan Smith? What was that tweet about? And is somebody walking around the NFL saying, "Do you want to trade for Roquan?" and they're not an agent of Roquan's?
So here's the situation, Rich. And I talked to people within the league and with clubs who said they don't ever remember a memo like this ever coming from the league. There's a specific person who has been in the orbit of NFL players for some time and has assisted in a variety of different contracts that have been done around the NFL, which, again, you know, there's different ways to look at the letter of the law here, but the NFLPA certifies agents. You have to go through a process. You have to pass a test. This person is not a certified agent, and they were calling around to clubs saying, I represent Roquan Smith. We're trying to get a deal done. We're trying to get a trade and a contract extension. Well, not only did clubs hear that, but agents got wind of it, and some agents informed the union what was going on. So the union talked to the management council and had them send that memo saying if it's a not certified agent, you're not allowed to talk to them, period. Like, that's just against the way that business works in the NFL. But the really interesting part then about the memo was the fact that this was once again a warning shot fired by the NFL about tampering. We know that they came down hard on the Dolphins because of tampering with Tom Brady and Sean Payton. But in the course of that same memo about this specific person, it also pointed out you need to have direct written permission to discuss trades with a player or his agent. In other words, it's not good enough for the agent to tell you, hey, I've got permission, or to get a phone call from the club. No, they specifically need to write the permission, which is, again, something the competition committee has pushed here, which is this is a corrosive thing, as they put it in the memo, to the game, just tampering that goes on, even though we all know that there are certain areas, particularly around free agency, where there's, various levels of contact that may or may not be within the letter or the spirit of the rules. But the league is really making this a point of emphasis here, and it's a clear message that, Roquan Smith or anyone else, as you're trying to get deals done, you need to make sure that you have actual permission from the club, because if you don't, then you're potentially facing serious consequences.
Well, so, Roquan Smith's got to know that. So so is there somebody like his friend or colleague or somebody with a legal background that knows him, just, calling people up and saying, do you have Les Snead's number? Or just throwing out a name, obviously, but just and just calling teams up, and that word got out and it filtered up to 345 Park Avenue, and they fired off a warning. Is that
correct? That is exactly it. And this is somebody, again, who's and the person was identified in the memo. It's somebody who's been involved with a handful of other high-profile player contracts through the years. So this was a known thing that had been going on. The unique part of this is it's a trade, and so teams were getting the calls from someone saying, "Yeah, I'm Roquan's agent," and then the teams are, "Well, I didn't think Roquan had an agent. Right. What are you trying to do? Do you have permission to call me?" "No." "Okay, well then, what's your plan?" It's a very different
that's wild
type of situation. And quite frankly, Roquan's not in a position where he has a great deal of leverage because he's under contract for this season. He can be tagged a couple of times by the Bears as well. And at some point, and I would anticipate, Rich, we're coming up on this maybe as soon as next week, that either they're going to get a deal done or the Bears are going to say, okay, enough of the hold in. You're now going to get on the practice field and you're going to play for us this season. Because as much as these hold-ins have become commonplace and teams kind of largely go along with them, you're not technically allowed to do that. Withholding your services also violates the CBA, so they can start fining him at any time. My understanding is they've not done that yet, but that's kind of the next step if he doesn't practice. But for Roquan also, again, because of his relative lack of leverage here, when they say, hey, it's time to practice and play, his best move may just be to go ahead and practice and play before you get into an entire other fight, knowing that ultimately you can't force their hands if trading you is not something they want to do.
This is one of the best players in the game too, Tom, certainly at his position. And you just were at Bears camp. Based on what I saw last week, the team is saying whenever it's brought up about what Roquan's thinking, well, you got to ask him. And then he's not available to be asked questions of, because the Bears policy is if you don't practice, you're not made available to the media. And so nobody can actually go up to the guy. And it's a wild situation. What was it like being around it?
Well, from what I saw, I mean, I was there for 2 hours. I never saw Roquan, and I was watching the rehab group the entire time. He's generally, from what I understand, he's kind of come out there during practice and been, standing around. He was at the preseason game. I think we saw that on TV the other day too. In terms of the Bears, they're just kind of moving forward here. They're trying to get new schemes up and running, a new culture up and running with Matt Eberflus there and the GM, Ryan Poles. That defense still, at least in the one practice I saw, and it's always dangerous, Rich, to draw conclusions when you're there for one day because you don't know what the emphasis is and what it's looked like the rest of the time. But, the defense was living in the backfield. That offensive line, they're still sorting that out, how they're going to protect Justin Fields. The receiver group right now, I mean, they've got a couple of guys who are not on the field because of injuries. Pringle's been out and Bayless Jones has been out, but they were running yesterday. Besides Darnell Mooney, their first team receivers were Equinemius St. Brown and Nasimba Webster. So, you're not throwing to, no offense to either of those guys, but you're not throwing to all pros out there. So, it was a battle for them, but Justin was still on the field a good 20, 30 minutes after practice while I was talking to some folks out there, going through extra reps, throwing the ball to Mooney. There's a lot to learn with Luke Getsy's offense. It's just, you just wonder as you move forward here, does he have enough kind of, firepower around him to draw a true evaluation off Justin Fields in 2022? Tom
Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. What's the latest on Zach Wilson? He's here in L.A. I'm thinking later of taking a boombox and standing outside his window like Say Anything. You tell me how he's doing, Tom.
It might be frowned upon at the hospital.
It might be.
Trying to focus in there. But, the surgery's happening. I don't even know where I am. I don't know what time zone I'm in. But it's happening right around now.
Right.
Wilson is getting the surgery. He's got it's a different type of an injury because it's his, lateral meniscus and then a bone bruise on top of it. And we've seen bone bruises be, really challenging because they're a little bit unpredictable. The Jets, after he suffered the injury, obviously it was a sigh of relief once they knew the ACL was intact, along with, as far as they know, the rest of the ligaments. But you still have a meniscus surgery that could go a couple of ways here. They're hopeful it's going to be, they say 2 to 4 weeks. Realistically, this type of surgery is at least 4 weeks. So, likelihood it's Joe Flacco September 11th against the Ravens regardless. But when you go in for meniscus trim, there's always the possibility you find additional damage, whether it's the ligaments or more meniscus damage or a different type of meniscus damage that requires a repair, which would be season ending as well. So they're optimistic going into it here. But, it depends what Neil Elitrash finds during the course of surgery to actually determine exactly what the course of action is from him.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. Seahawks Steelers preseason game, fascinating because you got two teams that are still to name their week one starter at the quarterback position. Walk me through what that game sussed out for anybody seeking a little bit more certainty for the Steelers and the Seahawks in that order, if you don't mind, at the quarterback spot. Tom.
Well, with the Steelers, they've had a legitimate three-way competition between Trubisky and Pickett and Mason Rudolph. The thinking going into this was that it was going to be Trubisky, that, if they had to play a game now, he would be the guy. But obviously Kenny Pickett's the first-round pick, and Mason Rudolph's been the one who's been the surprise through the course of training camp. So I would fully anticipate And based on when I talked to Mike Tomlin a couple of weeks ago at Steelers camp, I think they're going to take, 2, if not 3 preseason games to sort that out. And then with the Seahawks, Geno Smith got the start in that game, but, I was at Seahawks camp last week, and I would be surprised, let's put it that way, if Drew Lock is not the starting quarterback of the team. Geno's the guy who's paid his dues. They love him in the locker room. He got a chance to play. He played pretty well last season when he got on the field. With Drew Lock, there's a little bit more upside. He's really focused on taking care of the football. He's got the athletic ability. He can get out and move. And he threw it really well the day I was there too. So they're going to, take their time on this one. I would think that, potentially Locke would get the second start or the start in the second preseason game here. But, it would be really surprising to me just kind of knowing the direction that they're going on a team that, by the way, Rich, I think everybody is, probably underestimating the Seahawks. You look at every power rankings, they're like 28 to 32. They're down there at the bottom. They got a lot of speed at receiver. They got a lot of speed in the secondary and at linebacker. I don't anticipate that they're going to be a bottom feeder this season at all. I wouldn't be surprised if they're contending, at least to make the playoffs, just like every other year with Pete Carroll all the way into December and January.
How about that from Tom Pelissero? So where does Jimmy G sit in on all of this with everyone waiting to see if Watson's out for the full year, and that might be a spot that the Browns would be interested in if Watson is out for the full year? Where does everything stand with one James G right now, Tom?
Well, when I went through 49ers camp, everybody said he's throwing the ball really well. He's zipping it around. It's just kind of, he hasn't done any of the movement stuff that you do in the course of practice because he's just throwing on the side right now. So he's got plenty of arm strength. It's just, regaining that, making every throw to every area of the field. That's kind of the process that he's still going through here. In terms of the Browns, we'll know when there's a decision from Peter Harvey on the appeal. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Does Jimmy Garoppolo want to go into that situation and be the placeholder for Deshaun Watson? If it's a full year, maybe. But also, if it's a full year, you quite possibly are going to have a federal lawsuit filed that's going to go into the courts. And then whether it's week 1 or week 7, at some point, Deshaun Watson might end up playing again, which just puts, Jimmy in kind of a weird spot. By the time that it gets time for Garoppolo to be traded, because my belief is that they will take this all the way down to, I think it's August 30th is the final cuts. They'll probably take it all the way down there just to see if there's an injury somewhere else in the league before they would, ultimately, likely to cut Jimmy, assuming that Trey Lance is healthy. You'll have more information on the Watson front at that time. And, it really comes down to where is Jimmy going to go? He's got a non-guaranteed salary. So somebody's going to have to pay him. He's not coming in, I would not anticipate, for the minimum anywhere. So who's willing to spend money on that position? Who wants to bring him in and continue kind of going along this process? Because he's still going to need to ramp up his throwing and actually get out there and practice football for the first time since he had that surgery back in March. It's just a unique situation based upon the fact that you've got this guy who's, he's been to a Super Bowl, he's been to an NFC Championship game, he's won a lot. He's also had a lot of injuries, and he's coming off of a significant surgery. What's the price point that makes sense on that? For everybody involved, it makes sense to do what they're doing at this point. They couldn't trade him before training camp, so take this all the way down for the next 2 weeks here, see what the lay of the land is. Maybe somebody's not happy with their quarterback options. That's always a possibility as well. Something's going to happen, barring an injury to Trey Lance. I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is a 49er 2 weeks from now. But they may well take this all the way to August 30th before making that decision because they can.
Yeah, and if it takes all the way down to August 30th, boy, that would be really tough. Even if they do release him, let's just say they wind up releasing him, and it's, August 31st, right? I mean, would the Seahawks really twitch in that direction and pay him after maybe Drew Lock had a very good summer and training camp session? I don't know if that's possible. And then, of course, we were talking about Carolina all that time for potentially Jimmy G, and then it's now Baker Mayfield versus Sam Darnold there. And in the same way that it'll be tough to think how the Seahawks couldn't go with wouldn't grow with Drew Lock after they traded Russell Wilson, in part got him back in that trade, and they're taking on Drew Lock's former team in week 1. It's the same thing with Baker Mayfield taking on his former team in week 1. That seems like a no-brainer to me right now, despite the talk of competition.
Right, and the Panthers were never going to trade for Jimmy. Seattle was never going to trade for Jimmy. So, again, what's the price point at which it makes sense to make a move? Houston's another possibility, but the coaching staff loves Davis Mills.
They should
see what he's able to do. It's a different type of a marketplace. But again, Rich, we've seen things. I mean, Zach Wilson, your guy, got hurt a week ago, and we didn't think that the Jets were going to have this quarterback question going into the season. We've seen Teddy Bridgewater get hurt. Carson Wentz last year had that foot. He ended up making it back for week 1. But there's always several situations where you have some uncertainty that arises through the course of camp and the preseason. So let's see here. I don't think that Jimmy would want to go into a spot where, it's hey, you're going to start 3 games while we wait for this guy to be ready. So then the question becomes, if he does get released on August 30th or shortly before that, does Jimmy sign immediately with wherever he goes? Or does he even wait a few weeks into the season to see maybe there's some other injury that happens and he's got a chance to start the entire season? Those are all moving parts here, and there's a lot of discussions going on behind the scenes as the 49ers, try to figure out if they've got some place they can trade.
Before I let you go, Tom Pelissero, open your notebook or what you're hearing. I'll give you an omnibus. What are people talking about when your phone line burns up and everyone's all chatty Cathy and you're hearing what? What's the general tenor of the conversations?
Every single person wants to know what's going to happen with Deshaun Watson in the league, just because it's such a precedent, because there were so many people who were ticked off about the Browns doing that fully guaranteed contract. I don't think that anybody holds it against the people involved in that, but there's plenty of people who are just kind of the Browns get what they deserve here if he ends up being suspended a long time, because they thought that what the Browns did with rewriting the economic laws of the NFL with the contract to lure Deshaun Watson in was not what they should have done. So I think there's a lot of curiosity about that. It's just precedent for future cases on personal conduct. Beyond that, it's just we're just now getting to that time. There was a trade yesterday with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside being traded to the Seahawks for Udo Amadi. It's those types of trades that are getting done right now, but you'll see a lot more of those kind of heating up here. There's definitely more calls right now about, those guys who maybe aren't going to make a roster. Do they pop up someplace else before the end of camp? And that's going to be a big part of the next couple of weeks as well.
Tom Pelissero, look for more of my calls. Always enjoy our chats. Very much so. Appreciated. You take care of yourself, Tom.
You too, Rich.
Safe travels. That's Tom Pelissero, everybody, who's going to go get a bag of Red Vines in the airport that he's in.